Well then, we've had an absolute rush of people in those last couple of minutes, which is exciting. So I think without any further ado, we will kick things off. So yes, so my name is Matt. I'm going to be looking after you all today. This is our 16th, 17th open day of the year. We do enjoy doing them so much. Today we're going to be talking about the impact of exam scores and admissions tests and things like that on your Oxford application. So it's a little bit granular today. We've got quite a lot of graphs, but it's all about showing off the depth of work that we do. To give you a little bit more background on myself, my name is Matt. I'm head of research here at UniAdmissions. My job is to make sure that all of the advice that we give to parents and students alike is all grounded in real data, that I can pull out a spreadsheet and show you that it has a p-value that makes sense, just to make sure that everything that we do is based on evidence rather than based on sort of things we might like to be true. I'm joined here today by my colleague Will. Will, tell us who you are. Who are you? Why are you here?
Yeah, hi everyone. So as Matt has told you, my name is Will. I run our team of consultants at UniAdmissions. So for anyone who's ever been in touch with us, spoken with us, you'll have spoken with either me or one of my team. And basically we're there to speak to students, get a good understanding as to what's going on and give as much advice as we can. And where suitable, if there are particular students that we think we could support, then, have a chat about what kind of things they ought to be doing and where we can fill in any gaps. So yeah, I spend most of my time working with my team and speaking with parents and students.
Fab, thanks Will. So as I mentioned a second ago, today we're going to be talking about exams and test data. This is sort of my specialism within the company, making sure that all of the information we have about the way these decisions are made is nice and mathematical, so we can give really precise information where we can. Next week, by contrast, we'll be talking about becoming a doctor. I won't be here because it's my week off, but I believe Will or possibly Rohan is coming along and learn the secrets of becoming a doctor next week.
Yep.
So that's something to look forward to. So today I'm going to be splitting things up into sort of three broad topics. We're going to be talking about what parts of the application matter, rolling out the famous pie chart very early on for any of you who are regular watchers. We'll be talking about the different pieces of information we get from the data about each subject, and we'll be talking about how much admissions tests matter, if at all. So yeah, on with the show. So that means we come to the pie chart first, Will.
Yeah.
So buzz through the pie chart, and then I will do the kind of nuance on the pie chart. For those of you who are new, this is in almost every presentation. It's one of our sort of our key explanatory tools, but Will fill you in a little bit on how it works.
Yeah. So I usually like to start this with a couple disclaimers. The first one being that obviously there are lots of different subjects at Oxford and Cambridge, and this is a very useful heuristic, but it will vary depending on different subjects, and we might talk about that a little later on. But basically, this breaks down the different parts of the application, the different ways that you're being measured by universities like Oxford and Cambridge, and puts a weighting there on each one. One of the key things, one of the main takeaways from any of these open days, if you haven't been, is to try and make sure that what effort you're putting into your application does mimic this weighting. What you don't want to be doing is to be spending 99% of your time on something which only contributes a small amount to the actual decision about whether or not they're going to take you on. So having said that, I'll take you through what these different parts mean. It should be relatively clear from the diagram. But as you can see, the admissions test, the interview, the exam grades, those three make up, the vast majority of the decision whether or not to take someone on. And that does go against what a lot of people think, or at least a lot of the way a lot of people spend their time. A lot of students will spend the majority of their time thinking about their personal statement and writing it, and doing well at school in their grades. But actually, if you do want to do well in this, you need to be focusing on the test and the interviews, as they do make up well over half of the decision whether or not to take you on. A bit of clarity on that everything else section. Broadly speaking, that's things like your personal statement, your school reference, the SAQ if you would be doing one, if you're applying to Cambridge, any other kind of slightly less tangible things that you've got going on which wouldn't really fit into the test or the interviews. But it should be pretty apparent that that actually just makes up quite a small part of you as an applicant. You know, they're not going to pay too much attention to that. Of course, if you're applying to a non-Oxford university, they don't have an admissions test, they don't have interviews, or, you know, for most subjects, for a lot of them. So naturally the weighting is going to change, and naturally the impersonal statement becomes more important, the grades become more important in terms of differentiating yourself from others. But when they do have this extra information, you know, they can use the interview far better than they can the personal statement as a measure of you as a potential student. I said earlier that things do vary a little bit from subject to subject. So as a broad example, the more STEM-based subjects, the more sciencey subjects are going to pay even less attention to things like the personal statement. They're going to pay more attention to your performance in the admissions test. Equally, if you are humanities-based, then it's likely that it's going to shift over a little bit. In terms of the differences between Oxford and Cambridge, the key thing to be aware of is, of course, Oxford's interview relatively few of their applicants. So Cambridge will interview pretty much everyone, up to 90% of their applicants they interview. So, you know, unless you do spectacularly badly at some point in the application, you know that you're in with a good chance of an interview. But with Oxford, it can be as low as 20 to 30% of their applicants that they actually ask to interview. So you've got a really clear choke point there whereby students are being funneled out and are being rejected. And so if you imagine this pie chart except without that orange segment, effectively the exam grades the grey segment, effectively the exam grades and the admissions test sort of fill in that space that's missing. So one thing which is worth bearing in mind is if you're thinking of applying to Oxford or Cambridge and you're not quite sure which one, if your exam grades are slightly lower than you'd like and you're applying to Oxford, you're going to have to make up for that with a very impressive admissions test score, else you might not make it to interview. Conversely, you might want to apply to Cambridge because you know you'll have the test, you'll have the interviews, so you've got more of an opportunity to prove to them why you would be a strong candidate. Matt, I think you wanted to add some nuance.
Yeah, I mean, you've covered the breadth of it really well there, Will, and like you say, the personal statement, there is a little bit of wiggle room there depending on the subject you're applying for. You know, if you're applying to study maths, you're not going to be writing any essays once you get there. So your ability to write an essay in the personal statement is going to be less important than it would be for English, where that is the main thing that you're going to be doing. So the information you just saw, that's all drawn from this information that was sent to us by Oxford, and it appears in their admissions handbook, just to sort of show our working. When this clarifies for applicants how much weight is put onto each part of this when it comes to the admissions decision and whether or not students are shortlisted or interviewed, those being synonyms. So yeah, as Will has said, if you're coming to us in, I believe it's year 12, so you've got your A-levels ahead of you next year, you still have control over 75%, maybe even more of your application and your chance of getting in. The only thing that's locked in so far is the GCSEs, and as we're going to come on to talk about, those have a fairly wide range around them in terms of success. In fact, the admissions test, when you come to sit that is going to be more important than your GCSEs in terms of the admissions decision. And when you consider that a lot of students will spend maybe 2 or 3 weeks preparing for that, and that's one test compared with all the revision you might have done for all of your GCSEs, you can see how that effort gets a little bit misallocated. We just really want to emphasize that using your energy intelligently, you know, working towards the admissions test, making sure that you get a good reference from the school, not spending weeks and weeks redrafting your personal statement, being sort of strategic about how you use your time and energy can make a big difference to your chances of getting in. So as I mentioned earlier, everything that we put forward, we try to make sure is based in hard numbers where we can get them. So here are a few of those. So we're looking at first at GCSE performance. So the scores of GCSE people who are applying, the GCSE scores they get, there's a really large variation between subjects as well as within subjects. So for some subjects, classics is the biggest example. The GCSE scores are really quite spectacular. I haven't put them into the presentation because they get thrown off by the fact that students who are studying classics tend to have done more GCSEs to begin with. So it isn't particularly useful for me to show you someone who's got 11 A stars, but they've done 14 GCSEs. But by contrast, there are other subjects. Law is the most noticeable one, which we will come on to look at in a second, where the GCSE scores are actually quite a lot lower than you might be thinking. And so that's just giving you a sense of sort of the range of what is possible and sort of where you should be aiming your ambitions at. So if we look, I've pulled out the top 5 most popular subjects at Cambridge, so the subjects that get the most applications. So for natural sciences, you can see the difference between the average applicant and the average offer holder is roughly the difference between turning a B into an A star, or turning one of those A's into an A star and one of those B's into an A, depending on how you want to look at it, which is a meaningful but not spectacular difference. The other thing to say is these are averages. So while half of the offer holders will be above this level, half of them will be below it as well. So if you've only got 4 or 5 A stars, that still means you can put in a perfectly competitive application, because this is the midpoint we're looking at. Half of everyone who is successful is working below this level. Engineering, again, we see really good, but again, not crazy results. We're not talking about 10 A stars, 1 A. And again, if you're looking at 4 A stars, which are now 8s, unfortunately, I don't have this data with the new numbers converted into it. You're looking at, say, 6 8s, 3 or 4 7s. That's going to be enough for you to have a really competitive application. So if you're only coming in with, say, 4 or 5 8s, that's not the end of the world at all. There are literally hundreds of people who are getting offers with that sort of GCSE performance. The same sort of goes for medicine. You see, we find ourselves very much at this sort of level where it's around 3/4 A stars and then 1/4 not, and then a little bit higher for the offer holders. But again, if you've only got 5 A stars, you've got a few more A's, that's still perfectly fine. You're still well within the range of what would be a reasonable applicant. As we mentioned a moment ago, law has on the whole the least sort of spectacular GCSE scores of the really prestigious subjects. So you can see there from that, there are plenty of people who are getting offers for law at Cambridge who are applying with, say, 4 A stars, 3 A's and 3 B's or something like that. So people who are doing really well, but people who aren't the kind of blowing everyone away 10 A stars kind of thing. That's still a completely reasonable level of achievement to be bringing to the table here. And the same goes even for maths. There are plenty of students who are applying without straight A stars, without even straight A's, and getting places. Will, I'm sure you have some personal experience to add here from the applicants you've spoken to in recent weeks.
Yes, so what you say about it being an average is, of course, really important to bear in mind. And when you are, if you're a potential candidate and you're thinking about applying, and you sort of see that you are maybe slightly below, slightly above, or wherever you align according to your subject and the GCSEs, you've got to bear in mind that actually this is less than 30% of the decision. So if you're above average, that's great, you're off to a really good start, but that can very easily be scuppered by below average test performance or a poor interview. If you're below average, it's not too late. that can very easily be rectified by a spectacular test performance and so on. So it's really worth not getting caught up on any one individual part, but really remembering that they are going to be looking at your application as a whole. Students who come to me saying, I am a bit worried about my GCSEs that are lower, but I've really kicked things into gear this year. I really want to go to Oxford or Cambridge. The solution there is to give a fantastic admissions test performance. What you want to do is give them absolutely no reason to doubt how credible you would be at their university. So if your GCSEs are slightly lower than you'd like them to be, don't let that corroborate a low admissions test score. Let the admissions test score disprove that and show to them, actually, this kid does know what he's doing. And that's really, really important. One thing as well is to bear in mind that they will be taking your GCSEs into account in terms of the other performance of students at your school. So if you have, let's say here for maths at Cambridge, if you were at the average applicant level, but actually that was way and above how everyone else performed at your school, that would put you in a pretty good position. Equally, if you had 8 A-stars, but that was actually one of the lowest performances of your school, they will know that, and that will be taken into account. So in that circumstance, you then still need to be putting in a good admissions test shift.
Yeah, thanks, Will. As Will says, the admissions tests are really in place to sort of confirm your record when you're putting these applications in. And so if your admissions test score is great and your GCSEs are less great, then it's the admissions test score that's going to be taken seriously, because that's the newest information. It would not be unusual by any means for someone to really blossom academically between the ages of, I don't know, 15 and a half and 17 and a half. That's by no means unusual at all.
They're quite a lot more interested in what you can do now compared to what you could do then. And occasionally, so that's good. Obviously, that should be what they're looking for. There are students who do, they're really not too invested in school, haven't really hit their academic stride at 15, 16, and they do very badly at GCSEs. But then they find in sixth form, they really come into their own and they start doing really well in their subjects. And if they do fantastically in their A-levels and they make an application, they're going to pay much less attention to the GCSEs. They're going to pay much more attention to the A-levels and the test, because, as Matt said, that's what's happened recently. That's the best, most recent, most valid measure of your ability. It's worth pointing out as well, a lot of GCSEs, a lot of students applying these days never actually sat GCSEs. So the admissions test is really one of the key standardized measures that they have of all their applicants. So, and more than that, they design it themselves. So they can design it to test you in exactly they want to test you. So of course, it's going to be a really important metric that they use.
Fab. Thanks, Will. Moving on to sort of thinking about subjects in the round. One thing that a lot of students don't realize is that there can be a really big difference in terms of the competitiveness across subjects. So the number of applicants for each place will vary a great deal from course to course. So the example I like to use is if you look at Oxford, only 16% of people who apply for biochemistry get a place, but more than double that number get a place if they just apply for straight chemistry. And the number for biology is somewhere in between, something around 21, 22%. So if you really want to study biochemistry, but you're worried that you're not going to get in because of that really high level of competition, there's an awful lot of shared content with chemistry. Biochemistry is, I'm not going to count the characters, but it's something like 70% chemistry. So if that's what you're interested in, applying for chemistry is a slightly less competitive course. It may be that you have a better shot there. It's worth thinking about whether you are absolutely wedded to the idea of having that bio bit on the end, or whether you want to apply for straight chemistry and then make it as biological as you can once you get there in terms of your choices. The other point here is around medical schools. So there are roughly twice as many places for medicine at Cambridge than there are at Oxford. And accordingly, roughly twice as many people get into Cambridge as get into Oxford. It sort of continually amazes us that people haven't figured this one out yet. But it's not that Cambridge is easier to get in any meaningful sense. It's simply that they have more spaces. But I know there's a little bit of a nuance here with the interviews, Will, that you can tell us about.
Yeah, so there's also a bit of nuance with international applicants. So I know that Oxford gets a lot of international applicants for medicine, and they have way fewer places. So that's going to be quite a big, again, a funnel point. In terms of the interviews, for Oxford Medicine, it's about 25% of applicants are invited. Conversely, for Cambridge, it's between 70 and 90. And this means a couple of things. So firstly, if you're applying to Oxford and you've got to interview, you actually know that about, probably around, well, roughly speaking, half of the people there who are at interview are going to have a place and half won't. Whereas at Cambridge, when you get to interview, actually only about a quarter of the people there are going to get an offer. So once you've gotten to interview, your work's still cut out for you, and you don't really know if you're in the top 20% or the top 80%. So it's very difficult to tell. If you are doing well academically, if everything is pointing towards getting an interview, then you might be inclined to apply to Oxford, because then you know that actually we can lose a lot of the competition early on. Whereas if you're one of the ones that needs that interview, you might want to apply to Cambridge instead. Cambridge interviews so many of their applicants that often they'll interview you when other medical schools won't. So places like Imperial, UCL, they'll only interview about a third of their candidates who apply. So a bit more in line with what Oxford does. Oxford is a bit stricter. Cambridge interview way more. And certainly it's always worth a discussion. So often students have a really clear sense of where they want to apply to, definitely Oxford, definitely Cambridge, definitely Imperial, wherever it is, and that's fine. But if you're not sure, it's worth having a bit of think, firstly about the differences between the universities, but also the strength in your application and how you can best apply that.
Thanks, Will. As Will says, it's really helpful to sort of think smartly about this sort of thing, but also to really weigh out where it is that you want to apply in advance. So we've been talking a little bit about how these decisions are made, and we've mentioned admissions tests a couple of times without really going into detail on them. So now I've got some horrible graphs for you. Hopefully you like graphs. So the admissions test, pretty much every subject at Oxford or Cambridge has an admissions test. There are a handful of exceptions. Chemistry at Oxford is one of the most notable ones.
Yeah.
There are a few others, but for the most part, almost every subject will have an admissions test. Now, these tests are, for the most part, sat roughly 2 weeks after the UCAS deadline. I think it's the 2nd of November this year, is it, Will?
So I don't know the exact date, but it's usually either right at the end of October or the start of November.
Yeah. So yeah, you'll put in your UCAS form and say this year the deadline is Friday the 15th of October. And then between 2 and 3 weeks later, you'll have the Oxford admissions test and a lot of the Cambridge admissions tests as well. So that means that if you spent all of your time worrying about your personal statement and not prepared for the admissions test at all, you're only going to have a couple of weeks to get ready for it. And unfortunately, the admissions test is really important. Now for Cambridge, quite a few of the tests are sat when you're at Cambridge for the interview rather than beforehand. This is because, as Will mentioned, Cambridge tend to interview a lot more people. And so it's more logistically straightforward to run the test when you're there in person anyway, and they can do it in the classic exam style rather than having to do it from multiple test centres. But that will vary as well with Cambridge. So for for the more competitive courses, you'll be doing it at the same time as the Oxford tests. It'll only be for a few courses which have relatively low levels of competition that you'll be doing the test at Cambridge. It's worth checking based on your subject.
It's worth saying as well, Matt, you use chemistry as an example of a subject at Oxford which doesn't have a test. And I was saying earlier that, Oxford like to shortlist you basically completely based on the test, so they don't interview as many, but they'll interview about 90% of their chemistry applicants because they don't have that test.
Yeah. Yeah, so if you're really confident in your interview ability, but less confident in your test ability, for example, then the chance to go for chemistry at Oxford, where you're very close to guaranteed an interview, rather than biochemistry, where you're only a 50-50 shot of getting an interview, that might be playing to your strengths better than other strategies. So we can look at some lovely graphs, as I threaten now, just to sort of show off the strength of the relationship between test score and outcomes. So this is for the PAT, which is the physics test at Oxford, which I believe also covers engineering at Oxford. As you can see here, you have the big blue line of all candidates forming. It's a sort of flattened bell curve. I mean, this is closer to a T distribution. You see, you've got a lovely stack of people who didn't do the test and flamed out after one question down there on the left. And it looks like one chap got an interview out of that. So well done him.
Might be an extenuating circumstance.
I was going to say probably extenuating circumstances. But what you can see is as we come across to the right, we've got these tiny peaks where only one person is getting an interview up until the point we get to about 43, 44. So there isn't a formal cutoff for these tests, generally speaking. But as you can see, there is very much an informal cutoff where your chances of getting an interview are perhaps, I'm not sure if they're even 1% at this below 40 mark. You want to be doing better than that to get the interview. And you can see at that point the rate at which students are getting interviews moves up really lovely and smoothly as the test scores go up, and then sort of flattens out as well as the number of students that there are there goes down. As you can see, the share of students who are getting an interview reaches the point where you're over, where you have roughly a 50% chance of getting an interview here around the 60 mark. And once you're over about 66, 67, everyone's getting an interview. So you can see that that test score is at a certain point guaranteeing you an interview to a certain extent. And then you can see with the offers start coming in here around the interview point. Obviously, you can't get an offer without an interview. And they continue at a roughly stable level relative to the number of interviews before really thickening up as you go along here. And you can see right down here at the end, students who are scoring above, I think, 88 in the test, all of them are getting in. And your chance of getting in are around 50%, perhaps even higher, even in the 70s and 80s. So that gives you a sense of just how strong that relationship between doing well on the test and getting in is. Will, I've got loads more of these, so
I did just want to say quickly, because this really demonstrates it so well. Anyone who's watching who is a student, I mean, I'm sure there are some parents there as well, but this should be sort of ringing alarm bells, because if I was a student now and I'd seen this would tell me that if I score in roughly the top 5% on this test, pretty much guaranteed a place at Oxford, studying the subject that I want to study. So if you are motivated, if you are committed, if this is what you want to do, you can see really clearly how you should go about doing it. We cannot overstress the importance of these tests. And you will see this pattern repeat and repeat across the different tests and subjects that we discuss. But this should be really eye-opening. And if you haven't started thinking about the test, or if you haven't even looked at the test, now's definitely the time.
Yeah, thanks, Will. As Will says, obviously the students here who are doing really well on the test, chances are they're good at the other parts of the application as well. They've got nice personal statements. They've done well in their GCSEs. But what we do know is that those kinds of test scores at a certain point, they're guaranteeing you an interview and they're getting you close to being odds on in terms of getting that place. So that's, the power of the test. We see the same thing in the MAT, which is the Oxford Maths test. Again, we mentioned earlier that the admissions test, the personal statement rather, is of relatively little importance for maths, probably to do with maths not really involving any essays. And you can see here an almost perfect bell curve type distribution of the performance in the MAT. You're not getting an interview below a certain score. You get to a certain score where you're guaranteed an interview, and you get to a certain score even where you're more than odds on to get that offer. But the relationship, those lovely nested curves, you can see how clear the relationship is between the test score and the outcome. We see the same thing in the TSA. I've only done 4 of these. I didn't want to bore everyone. I have dozens. We see the same thing in the TSA. So the TSA is scored based on a Roush ranking algorithm, which creates forced ranking, which is complicated, and I'm not going to explain. But that is basically why people don't score these really low scores. It's also a multiple choice test, so it actually takes an enormous amount of effort to do really badly on a multiple choice test. It's really hard when there are 5 answers to every question to score below 20%, because that's what you should achieve, even if you just put A for every answer. And as you can see, there isn't really anyone down there. Even our worst performing applicant performs fairly substantially better than you would by guessing, actually. So well done to them. But as you can see, we see the same relationship between the score in the test and the chance of getting an interview. I liked this one particularly because if we're looking at the buckets here, you can see that nearly 600 people are here in this. Oh, I've skipped ahead one. Sorry. There are nearly 600 people here in this this test bucket of scores between 60 and 65. Now, the chance of you getting an interview in there, you can see that maybe 60 or so people are getting an interview, and then maybe 20 or so are getting a place. Now, if you can get an extra 2 or 3 points to tip you from the 63 bucket into the 66 bucket, you're suddenly in this space where there are not only fewer people, just over 400 compared to just under 600, but the number of interviews is double and the number of places is double as well. And you see that same effect as you continue up into the 70s. Once you're clustered around the median in these tests is an enormous opportunity by getting an extra 3, 4, 5 points to push yourself from being, you know, a maybe 10% chance of getting an interview into a 30% chance, into a 40% chance, into an odds on, into a virtually guaranteed interview. These little, you know, there are only, I think, is it 50 questions on the TSA? Yep. So there are only, this is a case of getting 3 or 4 questions right. 3 or 4 extra questions, which is not an enormous amount in the grand scheme of things, and is probably only the work of another couple of days revision to really tighten up your work on a specific subject area.
So it is, yeah, a number of students that I speak to will sort of, they'll do a bit of practice and they'll see themselves getting 40 out of 50 and they'll feel pretty happy with that. And they'll see, oh, well, actually it's around average. So, you know, that's pretty good. But actually, as Matt said, you know, putting that up by 2 or 3 marks is going to make an enormous difference. And it's very easy, you know, it's very easy to go from getting 25 out of 50 to 30 out of 50. But as you get to the higher and higher end, it becomes more and more difficult to pump it up by a mark or 2. And you're only going to be able to do that if you do give yourself the time to do it.
Yeah, and the thing to add on that is it's all very well getting 40, 41, 42 when you're practicing at home without any pressure on you. You're going to lose 3 or 4 marks just because it's an actual exam, because it's stressful, you're worried, all those things are going to come into play. So don't take the score you're getting at home when you're doing it in a nice warm room on your own, relaxed and happy with a drink beside you. That's not going to be how you're going to experience it in the exam. So you want to be scoring really, really a little bit higher in the home practice sessions than you are hoping to in the test, because the test is just going to be more difficult. That's why it's a test. But I just pulled forward as well. We looked at the maths-based section of the TSA on the previous slide. You can see the same pattern happening here in the English-based section, the critical thinking. The relationship between the rate at which people are interviewed is very much the same, and you see that the clustering is even stronger in the critical thinking area. People really do get stuck in this 65 to 75 range. And the difference, particularly here between the 75 to 80 and the 85 to 90, 80 to 85, there is just a vanishingly small number of students in this section. And so if you can get yourself from this column here into one of these columns over to the right, suddenly you're changing your chance of getting in by such a huge margin. You know, almost everyone, you know, you're over 50% chance of getting in getting an offer here in the 80 plus, whereas you were barely at 25% over here in the 75 plus. So those are 3 or 4 really valuable marks in terms of taking you from might get in to probably will get in. So hopefully I've not frightened you too much about the admissions tests. Luckily, you do have ages, just about 5 months and a week to practice for them, which is enough time to really make that difference and achieve those results. And we can help. Will, tell us, well, don't tell me, I already know. Tell everyone else about what we can do to help.
Yeah, so what Matt said about having time now is really important. Obviously, most students are coming up to exams, and you may have exams for a week, you may have exams for a few weeks. And that's obviously going to take up time. And then, of course, it's the summer holidays, and you've probably got some plans, hopefully, maybe some work experience, and that's going to keep you busy. And then all of a sudden, we're back around to September, and it's time to start school again, and it's, A2, and that's a big ask. And you'll find that it's very easy for that time to slip away if you're not proactive and you're not careful. Doing a little bit of work on this every week consistently is going to make all the world of difference, and is going to mean that, unlike a lot of maybe some of your friends, some of your peers who don't follow that approach, you're going to be in a much better position when it comes to submission, test day, interview day. Okay. Now, of course, we have a process. We have ways that we support our students, and we've set up a number of programs in order to help students with different things. And we generally find that it's very important to not just approach something in one way, but have a number of different things that you're doing regularly to make sure that you are improving across the board. Yes, test is important. Yes, we want to focus on that, but not at the expense of other parts. And as Matt said earlier, you don't want to be doing lots and lots of personal statement stuff if you're not able to then do time on other things, but you still don't want to let that fall by the wayside. Our programs, basically, students join at all different times, and they're made up of 4 key parts. The first part is one-to-one tutoring. Matt, can you next slide me? Yeah, so naturally, this is really, really important. These tests are not designed to be easy. The interviews are not there to be walked into and walked out of very comfortably. These are designed to test you and to stretch you. And what we do with our students is we pair them up with tutors who have been through that process. They're at Oxford, Cambridge, or they've graduated, so they've been through it and they've helped others through it before. And they're able to make sure that you're working on the things that you need to be working on. They're able to focus these tutorials on what you're struggling on. It's so easy to practice stuff that you're good at, but that's not the best way to improve. The best way to improve is to focus on what you're bad at and work on that until it's something that you're good at, and then you find the next thing that's, I suppose, the least good. Students will be working with their tutor in one-to-one tutorials, as well as being set homework to work on outside of that. And this is paired with all our materials and resources, which should be on the next slide. Matt?
Yeah, sorry, I'm just getting the slides going.
Sorry. So of course, having a tutor isn't a substitute for hard work and practice. You can't just rest on someone else's laurels. You need to be putting in the work yourself. And what we do and what we've been doing over the past several years is putting together the best materials and resources that we can for you to work on the admissions test. So when your tutor says, look, you're struggling on the maths questions in the TSA before next week, I want you to have done X, Y, and Z, you've got everything you need to be able to do X, Y, and Z, and you can come back the following week, and maybe there are a couple of things that you're still struggling with, and they'll focus on that in the tutorials. But you're able to make a lot more progress if you are doing that work outside of the lesson time. And it's just like with school. It's just like with working towards an A-level, really, except this test is probably going to have a bigger impact on your chances than just one A-level. But your teachers will set you work. They will work on things with you in the lessons. And it's that sort of iterative process, which is really, really important. And you'd find that things slow down a lot if you, as I'm sure you will at some times, not do tasks that you're set. We've also got the portal, which we've designed relatively recently, and that really compiles everything. So you've got your video lectures there, you've got your practice questions, your textbooks, as well as other things like the enrichment seminars, which is actually the next part as well.
Yeah, let me just get that. There we are.
So the enrichment seminars is something that we run each weekend. There are 5 separate streams, so one for law, one for humanities, one for STEM, one for medicine, and one for economics. And so if you're a prospective lawyer, you'll be coming to these seminars each Sunday afternoon. They come with a student handout with suggestions for pre-reading as well as suggestions for further reading. So for example, it might be a seminar on libel law one week, and you might never have heard of libel law. So just rocking up to the seminar, you probably won't get much out of it. But it would be good to get an understanding of what the topic is, read around it a little bit before it, so you can come into it with some base knowledge, you can learn more. And then if it's a topic that you actually find really you really enjoy, you can then do the further reading, you can take it further beyond that. And that's really important. It's all part of, I suppose, the wider academic pursuits of you as a candidate, of you as a student. What we don't want students to be doing is basically the same as everyone else. We want to be exposing them to as many topics as possible. And then really it's on them to then explore them, ask questions, read more, and just find out more. The obvious benefit of this is that when it comes to interviews, not only do you have a broad peripheral understanding of a huge range of topics within your subject area, but you've developed a number of specific niches which you have, and trust me, they will be keen on you having developed those. That is to them an indication that you are invested, and you are academic, and you're rigorous in your approach. Naturally, there are some subjects which span these topics. So if you're a PPE candidate, you might be thinking, well, economics sounds good, but politics, philosophy, that's probably humanities. Those students come to both. So you really do have as much as you need in terms of exploring your subjects. And then the last part is, so students work consistently on their tutorials, with the resources coming to these seminars. The last part is we punctuate the program with these intensive courses, which we run just a few weeks before the real thing. So just a few weeks before your interviews, there'll be an interviews course. A few weeks before the test, there'll be a test course. And it's really there to consolidate all the work you've been doing through the year. And really, it's the last opportunity for any final issues, any final problems to rear their heads and to be solved, basically. Now, obviously, this is our way of doing it. This is what we've been doing over the last few years. But it's not right for everyone. We, before even discussing our support with any students that come to us, we really need to get a good understanding of them. And however you approach your application, whether it's with us or whether it's with your school or just completely on your own, there are a few key things. Firstly, give yourself as much time as you think you need, and then give yourself more. So if you think it will take you 2 months, give yourself 3 months. It'll take more. I cannot stress the importance of putting time into this. And I also can't stress enough the importance of consistent, regular work. You don't have to be doing 8 hours a day on this every day from now. But if you don't do few hours at least a week on the test, combined on test, on interviews, on wider reading, on personal statement development, on personal academic development, then you are going to find that you'll have to do 8 hours a day closer to the time. And you might say, well, I just won't do all that time, and that's fine, but you will not be able to give your best shot at this if you don't put time into it. And then the other thing is to make sure that you have the right kind of feedback and that you are using the right kind of resources and you've got some kind of structure. It's very easy to lose track of things. You are a year 12 student, you've got a hell of a lot of other stuff that you're doing, no doubt. Every student who's thinking of applying to Oxford, Cambridge is very busy. And if you're not disciplined with yourself, it will be very easy to lose track of things and to let it slip. Okay. I think that's pretty much all that we do in terms of our support. Is there another slide, Matt?
Yeah, I've got a couple more slides, Will.
You got another couple more slides. Okay.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah.
Let's go.
As well as just laid out, we do have a really comprehensive program. And the good news is that it does work. our students receive offers from Oxbridge at roughly 3 times the rate of students who don't work with us. Something that we're really proud of. And our record, I've pulled up the information here from Oxford. We get similar results relative to Cambridge. You can see that our success rate compares really favourably with even the Eatons and the Westminsters and the Harrows of this world. We don't have as nice playing fields, but we do have better outcomes, at least when it comes to Oxbridge. So we're pleased with that at least. We also offer, among other things, a 2-week trial for all of our programs. So if you decide after having a conversation with Will or one of his team to come and work with us, but after a little while later it turns out that it's not quite right for you, then that's not something we're going to hold against you. We're more than happy for you to walk away with no financial penalty associated with that. If we're not right for you, then we're not going to force it. We're more than confident enough in our set of programs to be able to offer that trial in the knowledge that we hardly ever have to use it.
Yeah, it's worth saying, obviously, so we put all of this kind of specific to what we call the cooling off period, which is this 2-week period. There's a lot of information about that in the T's and C's on the website. So, if this is something that you're interested in, but you want to make sure how it all works, it's all written there. To make it really simple though, basically when a student enrolls, they've got this period before their 3rd week or before their 3rd tutorial, like Matt says, to make sure that this is right. And it's also there for us to make sure it's right for you. If I speak for a long time with a student and we decide that there's a program that's right for them, and then they don't show up to their first 2 tutorials and they've not read anything, they've not responded to any emails, then obviously we're going to question whether or not this is the right thing for you to be doing. And that's really, really important. It is a big commitment that we ask of our students. And, I would expect anyone who's serious about Oxford or Cambridge to be ready to put time into it. But of course, this gives you a bit of an opportunity to actually see how it all works and see if it is right for you.
Fab. Thanks, Will. I think that brings us to the end of our slides, which is exciting.
Marvelous.
Fantastic. So that all that does is leave us with this lovely little animation that will show you how to book a consultation. Will, tell everyone about the value of the consultation.
Yes, so as it's showing you, you can basically sort of pick a time to have a chat with me or one of my team. It's there really, so some people just have like 1 or 2 questions, which we'll go through and discuss with them. Some people are, very clear, we'd like to enroll onto a program. Either way, it's usually pretty important for us to ask you quite a few questions. Now, some people can get a bit frustrated with me when they say, look, I just wanted an answer to this question, and I then have 10 more questions for them. But the short answer is there are no real yes or no answers in this kind of field. We need to know the context in order to be able to give you the right kind of guidance. If you're going to say, which subject should I choose? I need to know a lot about you. If you're asking which should I go to, Oxford or Cambridge, I need to know a lot about you. Equally, if you're interested in our programs, I'm going to want to know a fair bit about you as well. I'm going to want to know your academic background, what kind of support you have elsewhere, what school you go to, what kind of support they put on, where you're finding things most difficult at the moment, what kind of commitment you're able to make. These are all really important things. And our process is very consultative. Do be patient with us, because then by the end of it, you will have the right answers to your questions. And if there is a program that's right for you, we'll be able to enroll you onto it. Okay, really important to just give us a bit of time.
Fab. Thanks, Will. So that throws us onto the Q&A chunk of this afternoon. So if you have any questions, please drop them into the Q&A panel. We'll get to as many of them as we can between now and kick off our deadline at 3 o'clock. Hopefully, we'll be able to squeeze them all in.
I've seen one from Ramneek about where we can find admissions tests.
Yeah, go ahead, Will.
So basically, pretty much every admissions test, if you Google it, you'll be able to find specifications of it. Cambridge Assessments are the chaps who run these really. And so on their website, they've got pretty detailed information. Equally, if you're on the Oxford or the Cambridge website looking into your course, and if you look at usually there's a panel which says entry requirements, you'll be able to go through to that, and then it will say, however many A stars at A level, and you'd be sitting a test. So you will be able to find specifications of the tests. You'll probably be able to find a couple sort of mock papers, some past papers as well. So I was saying earlier, if you haven't, definitely have a look. What you ought to do, Ramneek, is have a look there, see what the tests are looking like, have a bit of a practice, identify, which things look manageable, which things look, less manageable. And yeah, that should be your first place to go.
Fab. Thanks, Will. So Urvi has asked us, can you tell us the distribution of places offered, interviewed, not interviewed for the LNAT? So I expect you're thinking of law at Oxford, Urvi, because Cambridge uses a different test. So a lot of universities use the LNAT, but obviously only Oxford go to the trouble of interviewing. So in 2019, which is the last year I have figures for, because we haven't got the final 2020 figures yet, we're still waiting to see how everyone's A levels go. 1,500. In fact, I'll put it on the screen, shall I? 1,566 people applied. Oh, this is going to be very small, isn't it? Let's see if I can zoom right in. There we are. 1,566 people applied for law at Oxford. 614 of them were shortlisted, so just under 40% of people were shortlisted. 226 of them got offers. So that's just over 14% got offers. So that should give you a sense. So roughly 600 getting interviews, 900 not getting interviews, and of the people who get interviews, just over 1 in 3 of them go on to receive an offer.
Do we have any stuff about LNAT score, Matt?
LNAT score. So I have. Let me have a look. Because I had some data across from the LNAT authority at Pearson from last year. Let's see. But I don't think I have anything explicit on scores at the moment. That's one. Urvi, if you book a consultation with us, I'm sure Will send me a message demanding that I get the relevant statistics together, as that's one I'm not going to be able to manage.
I think I've chatted with Urvi before, actually, Matt. Why don't, if you can find it, can you send it through to me at some point?
Yeah, I'll be able to get those today without any trouble, so I can shoot those across.
Brilliant.
Rebecca Elderton asks about access arrangements, such as extra time for the BMAT. My understanding is that's perfectly possible. Yep. It's one to do by coordinating with your school and with the admissions testing body, which is Cambridge Assessment in this instance. But yeah, plenty of people get extra time for the BMAT. It's just making sure you arrange that properly.
If you're not applying through your school, like if you're an independent applicant, or maybe you're an international and you're going to sit at a test centre, have a chat with your test centre about it. Yeah.
Yeah. If you're doing it through a school, the school should be already clued up on your access arrangements in any case. So that covers that. There we are. Will, can you tell us how to revise for admissions tests where there aren't very many past papers to look at?
Yeah, so this is obviously quite tricky for new tests. And this is across the board. When I was at Oxford, my degree had only been going for a few years, so they only had a few years of past papers. So you couldn't really see that many past questions. The solution really is to be sensible with your resources. But if you do have some money that you can contribute to it, there are resource banks that people make. We have a ECAA textbook which has lots of practice questions, and when we make these materials, what we do is we get tutors who have sat this test, so know it pretty well, to write banks and banks of questions which mimic it as closely as possible. So it's a good, it's a good replica of the real thing. And one other thing that we found quite helpful as well is for the past papers. So past papers you can find usually online, and it's great and you usually get answer keys as well. It's great if you get the questions right. Less helpful if you get the questions wrong, because an answer key won't tell you why you're wrong and how to get it right next time. So what we also do is we spend quite a lot of time writing work solutions, and I think we've had some of the 2020 papers, admissions test papers, were released last week or so. So at the moment, members of our team are sort of hurriedly putting stuff together for that. Of course, not so hurriedly that there'll be mistakes, but wanting to make sure that those resources are out as soon as possible for students who need to use them. It's also worth bearing in mind that a lot of these tests can bear resemblance to other tests. So, for example, people who are sitting, this happens a lot in the sciences. So, if you're maths, physics, maybe even natural sciences, a lot of those tests share similarities. And so once students use up all the materials within their test, they might branch out, outside of it to just use those as another kind of practice. So I'd have a look at, what other options there are in terms of tests. Might be worth having a look at other Cambridge tests or even Oxford tests as well.
Thanks, Will. Hideki has asked about doing the work that we do online. Will, can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so good question. I mean, the short answer is that yes, we are basically running pretty much everything online this year. We're still, I'm kind of hopeful that we might be able to do some courses in person in the UK, but I'm generally quite a skeptical person by nature, so I'm not getting my hopes up too high. If we do run them in person, then we'll do what we've done, in previous years, where we have an in-person version and either a recording or an online equivalent, so that our international students can sort of get the benefit of having that consolidation period. But yeah, so currently the seminars are running virtually, courses are looking like they'll run virtually, tutorials are running virtually. All the materials and resources, absolutely, you can access them virtually. We'll often send hard copies of textbooks, particularly to students who work well from those. I'm the kind of person who much prefers to read a book, that I can hold. I prefer reading notes that have been written rather than from a laptop. So if you're anything like that, then we send the hard copies. Whereas actually, if you're the kind of person who doesn't care about paper, would much rather have it all in one place on their laptop, then you've got the materials virtually as well. Okay.
Fab. Thanks, Will. Violet has asked, can you tell us what percentage of medicine students are gap year students? So I don't have an exact figure for that. That's one I would have to research. I think it would be a little tricky to find out, just because it's difficult to know what age people are supposed to be in terms of school year. What I can tell you is that there are a huge number of people who apply for medical school in 1 year, don't get in, then reapply the next year, or that decide to take a gap year before applying to build up their work experience. Medicine is one of those areas where it really helps to have built up experience, life experience, work experience before you apply, so that you can make a better application. And as I say, applying twice for medicine is by no means unusual. So I would imagine a lot of them are students who've taken a year out. So if you're feeling anxious about that, then I would say waiting a year, 2 years, maybe even 3 between finishing school and starting medical school is perfectly normal.
I'd also say, a lot of people get caught up on things like that. And, am I shooting myself in the foot by applying this way? The key thing is what you've got to remember, and I think what is often lost in this application process, but the point of it all is so that Oxford and Cambridge or any of the other medical schools take on the best students. That's why they do this. That's why they have tests. That's why they have interviews. It's so that they can take on the best students. So if you're worried that you're a gap year student, or you're worried that you're a bit older, the main thing to do is just to make sure that they know you're the best student. If you're the best student in your year, as we saw with those PAT tests, if you have the best PAT score in the year, you'll get an interview, you'll get an offer. Give them no doubt that you are the strongest applicant. If you are taking a gap year, make sure you use that year. don't just go traveling, as tempting as it might be. Do go traveling a little bit, you know, enjoy yourself, but make sure that you're doing something productive with that year. Different admissions professors will see this differently, but I know that certainly for some medical schools, they can see gap year students as actually a bit more reliable than straight out of school. They're a bit more mature, they're a bit more experienced, and also they've got their A levels secured. So there's no risk there that they might underperform and miss their grades. So it's not, a lot of people can be very anti reapplying as a medical student, and you need to have the right reasons to reapply. I mean, potentially you got no offers, but it's not a death sentence. You can still do well, but you need to show them why they should take you on.
Fab. And there's one last question from Christina you wanted to answer, Will, and then we'll call it a day.
Yeah, so I am quite interested in international applicants, and I've recently written an article about it. So you're talking about how there's not really a comparison to GCSEs in the US. How do they basically how do they look at you in comparison to people that you know, people who maybe are applying from the UK? So the first thing to say is, if you don't have GCSEs, that's not the end of the world. Depending on your subject, if it's medicine, they often like a GCSE in maths or in English. But if let's say you're just applying for geography, something like that, it's not necessarily a bad thing. And actually, Oxford's policy is if you don't have GCSEs or an equivalent, they'll just look at your admissions test score. So if you don't have any GCSEs, but you're very hardworking and you can put a really good shift in for that test, you're okay. In terms of, you know, what international qualifications do they accept, most US students will have sat SAT or ACT. They'll often take that. Equally, as you move into the equivalent of sixth form, you'll either do APs or SAT subject tests. Though I did see, I'm not sure what's going on there, but I did see recently that I think SAT subject tests have been discontinued. But anyway, you know, you usually sit APs or something along those lines, and those will be accepted, provided you score sufficiently highly. Those will be accepted, and both Oxford and Cambridge and most other universities, some have easier to navigate websites than others, but most other universities will have a big directory of all the different sort of countries. Usually it's done in a big A to Z format, and so you scroll down until you find the US, so you'll be sort of near the bottom, and they'll tell you specifically what they're looking for in terms of your APs or your SAT or your ACT. I think I remember the SAT is out of 1600, and I think 1480 is the minimum entry required. It is the minimum. Don't quote me on that. Have a look at their websites, but just to give you a rough idea. Okay.
Fab.
I think that's it.
Yeah, I think that's it for today. Thank you very much, everyone who's joined us. It's been lovely to see you all.
Yeah.
Have a lovely weekend.
Matt, I just noticed one in the chat. Someone did ask for the stats for HSPS.
I can drag those out. That's for
because it's only one more. I thought, why not?
Oh no, she's gone. We've lost Fatima. Oh well. I'll find them for anyone else who was interested. Let's quick. Cambridge. Here we are. HSPS. So just under 22%. Roughly 1,000 applicants. About 237 places last time round. So there you are. 22%. Okay. And Vanny asked about stats for the TSA. So the TSA is a little more complicated. This is a good one to get in touch with Will, and we can send you over the information we have. I think we have some good blog posts on the TSA, don't we, Will?
But we had the TSA graphs up earlier.
We had the graph, didn't we? Let's get the graph back.
We've got we've got it. We may as well make the most of it.
So yeah, here we are. Here we have the graph of the TSAs, Vanny, giving you a sense again of that really big gap you get round here in the 70s. This is the maths component. If we swap over to the English component, you can see that getting those few extra points around the 70 mark make a really big difference to your chance of getting that into, and then to that your chance of getting a place. Fab. All right. Well, thank you very much, everyone. It's been lovely to speak to you all, especially you, Will.
Thank you. Likewise.
A Have a lovely weekend, everyone, and we'll catch you next week when Will and I think possibly Rohan,
Possibly Rohan.
maybe James, who can say, will be talking to you about applying to become a doctor. So say goodbye, Will.
Goodbye.
And it's goodbye from me as well. Have a lovely weekend, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.